This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
It's Bengals week. It's the end of the season, and it's odd because usually this thing, they've played the last game of the season the last few years, and I feel like whenever they schedule the Browns and Bengals to play the last game of the season, we always are like, oh, this is gonna be a big one. And it usually ends up not mattering for one of us. Like, I feel like it's a curse for one of us to get this game at the end of the season. Now, it's a little bit different this year. This time, it's the Browns who are going to the playoffs, the Bengals who are kind of just trying to round off a disappointing year. I know the Joe Burrow injury has been obviously what has cost you the playoffs. But in your opinion, when you look at this, even like zoomed out, do you look at this season as a disappointment? Do you still look at it as a disappointment even when you factor in Joe Burrow got hurt? Or do you look at it as kind of an achievement? Like, hey, we still got to 9 wins without Joe Burrow for half the season. Like, how do you as a Bengal fan kind of view this season? Is it more of a disappointment or like it feels like a missed opportunity, or is it kind of like, oh well, we had a lot, but we overcame some of it?
Definitely feels like a disappointing missed opportunity. I mean, when you went to the AFC Championship 2 years in a row, it's kind of a situation where it's Super Bowl or bust. Plus, entering into this season, you knew that the future was going to be a little murky with certain people after Joe signed the contract, being in free agency, where you have a guy like Tyler Boyd, right? Like, this could be the last for him. This could be the last ride potentially for T. Higgins. I don't expect it to be. I expect them to tag him. But guys like Jonah Williams, guys like DJ Reader, guys that were part of somewhat the secondary core of this team, right? When you talk about the first core, that starts with Jamar Chase, Joe Burrow. You probably throw T. Higgins in there, maybe Joe Mixon. But then when you look at that secondary core, it's kind of the DJ Readers and those guys. And so I think this does feel like a missed opportunity because you just kind of felt, okay, we got to the Super Bowl with these guys in 2021. They know what it takes to get back there. You have some rough luck last season with some injuries happening on the offensive line towards the end of the season. And you're thinking that you fix that by going and getting an Orlando Brown and trying to replace some of those guys like Jesse Bates and Von Bell. And it really just amounts to a little bit of a wasted opportunity. Like, I'm proud that they were able to fight for what it was. But for me, coming into this season, it was Super Bowl or bust, even AFC Championship or bust, but really it was Super Bowl or bust, because when you have that taste in your mouth of losing the Super Bowl with those guys, you kind of want to try to get back and try to right the ship. And this season, they just weren't able to do that. And so, the way that the season started off was disappointing. Obviously, Joe Burrow goes down and comes back and just doesn't look like himself. But outside of just Joe Burrow, the defense didn't look like itself. Like, at first, there were things here where we're like, okay, well, this is a defense that kind of depends on the offense to be consistent. But they do make plays here and there. They do the bend but don't break thing. And they look decent early. But as the season went on, there were things that were extremely disappointing when I talk about the explosive plays. Like, it just seemed like whenever somebody wanted something this season, they just were able to take it from the Bengals. And that just generally wasn't characteristic of that defense that we saw from the previous years. So I would say it's been definitely a missed opportunity and somewhat disappointing as a season, if I'm truthfully speaking. Like, it was cool while Jake Browning came in, and it was a good story, but you wanted to get back to the Super Bowl. So anything short of that, especially missing the playoffs, definitely feels like a missed opportunity, and it's definitely disappointing.
So when you look at this season, what do you as a Bengal fan, what are you most concerned about what you saw from this season? Like, is it the defense? Is it the secondary? Is it like, hey, this ain't what it needs. Because that's one of the things, even when Joe Burrow was in there, I remember saying this a lot on AFC North Talk, where it's like, hey, people kind of forget one of the things that really made the Bengals work was like, yeah, they have Joe Burrow, they have, all those receivers and everything else, and they can score quickly if they need to. But that defense really gave them like a lot of margin of error where they could go and have these drives where they don't really do, or spans where they don't really do much on offense for like a half a quarter or maybe even a quarter, but still get away with it because that defense was so solid for them. And did you see stuff here where it's like, hey, maybe it's just we're playing a lot of rookies and that'll get fixed? Or is it like, hey, we need to make some changes in the offseason type energy?
I think it's a combination of both, right? Like they ended up starting the two safeties, which I always felt like Jordan Battle should have started from day one. I felt like he was the better player over Nick Scott. They tried to go and get Nick Scott, who was a guy that came from a team that had won a championship. But when I really looked into Nick Scott myself, he really was a guy that was a special teamer, that ended up moving up because there were injuries for the Rams. And so he wasn't really a guy that I really honestly trusted. And that kind of came to fruition this season. And then you had Dax Hill, who essentially was kind of a rookie this year. He kind of redshirted last season with not playing that much. So he started into that role. I really feel like, from my understanding, a lot of the stuff that I saw this season, I didn't see the previous season. And the only changes that I can really point to are there being no Jesse Bates and no Von Bell, and that back end communication not being there, not being able to help the linebackers even get in the right position, and there being confusion on that side. So I think it's definitely them being young, not being used to Lou's system. I don't know. I don't really feel like Lou's system changed that much. So for me, I think that the situation was a little bit of the rookies having some issues there, being young. And then I also would say some of the personnel does have to change. When we look at the 5 tech position that we have, which was originally filled by BJ Hill, but 3 tech was also filled by Larry Ogunjobi. And since they've lost Larry Ogunjobi, it's really left a massive hole for them there. They've kind of moved BJ Hill into the role, and then they tried to move Zach Carter kind of into the 5 tech role that BJ Hill was playing while Larry Ogunjobi was here, and he has just not been good. So I think there definitely need to be changes in terms of the defense, especially in the trenches. For us to see, it's been like this for the last 3 years. Whenever DJ Reader is not there, the run defense is non-existent, and they are super reliant on DJ Reader being there. And it just cannot be a situation where you're solely relying on one person. Like they kind of solely rely on Trey Hendrickson to be that pass rusher. They tried to change that this offseason with bringing in, drafting a guy like Miles Murphy, and that's helped a little bit, but they are still heavily reliant on certain guys. And I think this year it's come back to bite them, honestly. So I think next year in the trenches, they have to get better. I think the safeties have to improve. I don't know if it's, a safety coach thing, because it's been the same safety coach that was here when Von Bell and Jesse Bates were there, but they might look to figure out what's going on. Is it that these guys just need a year in the system? Maybe it is that. I do feel good about Jordan Battle. I do feel solid about Dax Hill because I am under the guys that he is a rookie. He does need to get comfortable. But I think you definitely move on from Nick Scott. That's a big change that has to happen. That was a bust of a pick. You move on from him. Maybe you bring in a veteran safety, or maybe you end up drafting another corner. The other thing that needs to change is Cheeto. I love Cheeto. Great player while he was here when we brought him in as a free agent, but he was playing off of that knee injury, and he clearly kind of lost a step. He was kind of outplayed this season by DJ Turner. I expect them to probably move on from him. With that being said, they do have a bright future with the corners that they do have, but they are still young. So they have CTB, they have DJ Turner. And DJ Turner, like he really, I would say for the most part, he had a good season. These last couple of games, he's had some issues. So we'll see where that goes in next season. I think he can still be a good corner, but I think they possibly bring in another corner potentially as insurance. Mike Hilton, I think he had a great year. Like he started off not doing as great, and then he just kind of morphed into the best guy in the secondary for the rest of the season. So I think that there will be changes, mostly in the trenches. Maybe you bring in another safety. You definitely got to get rid of Nick Scott. But I just don't know what the difference was between having Jesse Bates and Von Bell there with that leadership. I don't know if it's an inside the locker room thing, mentality thing, IQ thing. I'm still trying to figure it out now. So I'm actually going back and analyzing what it is. But I'd be remiss to say that it has to be the safeties not being familiar, and it has to be that they got to get rid of Zach Carter and they got to get a new 5 tech in there to help on this defensive line for sure.
Yeah. And when it comes to Joe Burrow, the wrist injury there, that seems like a pretty straightforward recovery for him, right? Like there's no real concern of that lingering into the preseason next year. It should be pretty fine once the offseason ends.
I expect that it would, but given the circumstances of Joe the last 3 seasons, I think that they'll still kind of tread lightly with that situation. He's just had bad luck. None of the injuries have been kind of related. They just have come sporadically. But I think that they will try to focus on not rushing him or moving him along. And sometimes you got to kind of protect Joe from himself, because Joe's the type of guy, he likes to lead by example and stuff like that. So if he feels like he can go, sometimes he'll just go out there to his own detriment. But I don't expect it to be a situation where he'll be out. But knocking on wood, I mean, we've seen him go down the last 3 preseasons. So I don't know what their plan is. I honestly didn't like their plan for this preseason because Zach Taylor we were a lot critical of Zach Taylor. It actually kind of helped because Jake Browning played all of the games, but the other side of it was the offensive line did not play at all in preseason, like none of the starters, and they clearly came out extremely rusty. So I hope that he has a better plan next year. I think he moves out of a fear of, I don't want any preseason injury. So I'm going to do whatever it takes for that to not happen. And I think as a result of it, it kind of has led to a lot of these slow starts from the Bengals. So I expect Joe to be back there. But then again, I could see Mike Brown or someone stepping in and saying, we know he's good, but we're not going to unleash him until, we're ready to put him out here and we feel comfortable.
Yeah. It's a weird spot. You gotta be super cautious with that kind of thing. But also it's like, he's going to have to play football. And I don't know. The one thing with the Bengals is like, it just seems like they try every year and it just never works right, is this offensive line fix. Like, we've been talking about fixing that offensive line since Michael Jordan let that man through and tear Joe Burrow's ACL. We've been arguing about Panay, or is it going to be this guy, Riley Reef, and everything else? Who you can bring in? Is Jonah Williams enough at left tackle? It seems like they have filtered out almost like they have changed almost every position on that offensive line. Like, the one thing you can't say about the Bengals, they're not trying, but what they have tried has not felt sufficient. And I've always felt like, to me, the Bengals' issues with the offensive line were less about who's playing the offensive line and more about just kind of like the overall philosophy of the offense and the overall philosophy of Joe Burrow. Like, you get Joe Burrow on the podcast, he says sacks doesn't matter. And he does have a point to that, right? Like, it depends on how much sack yardage you're taking. But, he's not somebody who's trying to do everything to avoid a sack. That's kind of his play style. We see that with Deshaun here in Cleveland. And also his play style, since he likes to get out the pocket a little bit, move around sometimes, that can lead to some sacks. And then you compound that with Zach Taylor and your offensive line coaches kind of low-key refusal to get out of these 5-man protections at times because they don't want to keep a tight end on the field. And part of that is because you have those 3 receivers, right? You want to put them out on the field as many times as you want to bunch them up, or you want to stack some of them. So in order to stack some of them, you got to have the line free. Like, there are logistical reasons why the Bengals do what they do. But do you think that's more of the problem with the offensive line than Orlando Brown or Jonah Williams at right tackle? Like, do you think they're just kind of victims of circumstances at this point?
Man, for me, it's been even longer than the last 2 seasons. I feel like I've been questioning this offensive line since like 2016 after Andrew Whitworth and Kevin Zeitler left.
No wonder you get annoyed with me when I be complaining about the Browns offensive line. I be like, they're not as good as 2020. It's like, dog.
Bro. And I like that is the blueprint for what needed to happen. And I always sit back and I think it's a combination of several different factors, right? I think number one, let's start with the scouting division with the Bengals, right? They haven't had the best track record when it comes to drafting offensive linemen. As much as I've gotten on Jonah Williams has probably been the best offensive lineman that they've drafted, and that's kind of crazy because Jonah Williams, he had a good season this season, so I'm not. A lot of people call me the Jonah Williams hater and this and that. He had a good season this year, but he was a guy that kind of struggled, right? And then when you look at some of the other picks that they've had, Cordell Volson, right? He was a guy that they drafted last year, really struggled this season and a part of last season. And that's what you get when you take guys that aren't out of Power 5 conferences. Now, I'm not trying to hate on the guy because he didn't play at a Power 5, but if you're a Cincinnati Bengals offensive line team, a team that just gave up, 70 sacks in one season, why are you taking a guy that is out of the Power 5 conference? They've had other misses such as Deontay Smith and some of these other guys. They just have not drafted it well. Now, I will commend
you just want
them
those you want the premium commitment, right? Like, I think that's more or less like if the guy was like a group of 5 recruit, but he was like the third tackle in the draft. Okay, whatever, right? But it's like we're taking late round guys or mid round guys, and they played at Marshall or wherever Cordell Volson played at, and it's like, are we serious right now? Like, I think that's right. I think that can factor into it, right? Because you want to make sure your team is being serious, and part of serious, like, hey man, like, okay, we got Cordell Volson. With DeJuan Jones was available when you took him, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's like there are guys like that we know are good, but like, okay, it might be a little extra work for you as a coach. But it's like, come on, like you gotta. I can understand the frustration, right? Because fortunately for the Browns, we decided it was worth that work for DeJuan Jones, and he was worth the work. He was worth it.
No, for sure. DeJuan was definitely a guy that I wanted them to definitely take, but I think it's a combination of front office not knowing, which guys to really take. That's been a position that they've really struggled at for a while now. And then you talk about the coaching as well. I think one of the things that the Browns did that a lot of people don't realize is when the Browns hired Bill Callahan originally wanted to coach with his son with him in Cincinnati. And at the time, Zach Taylor was loyal to Jim Turner, who's no longer on the team anymore, and decided to pass on him and keep Jim Turner. That was a mistake because Jim Turner is a horrible offensive line coach. I mean, he had a horrible track record. This is the guy that was responsible for the Miami Dolphins hazing incident. And a lot of guys, while he was there, like 3 guys like retired from the offensive line. That should have been a red flag right there. So they've really struggled to replace him. So they went back to Frank Pollock, who had like one good season with them. And he actually was there before Zach Taylor came in. And originally Zach Taylor passed on bringing him back. It was a weird kind of situation. It was like he either quit or Zach didn't let him on the staff. They said back then that they didn't feel like their philosophies lined up because he was kind of a zone blocking guy. Zach was running that rim system. He said that was the excuse that he gave at the time. So after the Jim Turner fiasco that happened, from what I heard, Mike Brown came down and said, no, you're taking Frank Pollock as your offensive line coach. Now, Frank Pollock, from some people that I highly trust their opinion on, they have always said, like, what did Frank Pollock really do? He kind of rode Bill Callahan's coattails when he was in Dallas. As soon as Callahan moved on from Dallas and went to Washington, he took over, and then the Cowboys got rid of him. So a lot of people felt like, okay, he's riding off of that. Then after the Bengals, where I think a lot of people liked him because he was able to get Joe Mixon the AFC rushing title that year. I think it was 2018. And they brought him back. But after he left there, he went to the Jets and didn't really do anything there. And so Mike Brown forced him kind of on this team. He's brought in good players, right? Like he's got them to get guys like Orlando Brown, and he's gotten them to bring in the Tate Harrises and stuff like that. But from what I've heard, a lot of the techniques that he's teaching these guys are outdated. It's not really good technician being taught to these guys, and they're going out and they're just not looking good. So to me, I think that's another part of it. I think Frank Pollock, unfortunately, has to be removed because he's not only the offensive line coach, he's a run game coordinator. And the Bengals run game was horrible. Like for the Joe Burrow thing, I think one of the things that they tried to focus on was the pass blocking, right? But to their detriment, no one can run block. It's literally whenever you hand the ball off to anybody, somebody is meeting them right at the line of scrimmage. They're not physical enough. They're doing this thing where they get a lot of these big guys, but none of them have athleticism. So there's not much that you can do with the offensive line. So I think it's part personnel. I think a big part of it is coaching. They've really whiffed the last two guys, the last two offensive line coaches that they've had have just not been. I've heard both things. Now, I will say that Jim Turner was worse. Like he was so bad to the point that Billy Price refused to do any of the techniques that he did, and that got him benched. Billy Price wasn't good anyway, but those were things that I heard, and that was one of the reasons why Michael Jordan was in, is because Michael Jordan was the only offensive lineman that would listen to Jim Turner, and then he ends up getting Joe Burrow hurt. So I think this offseason, I wouldn't be shocked if Frank Pollock is no longer the offensive line coach for this team. So I think it's a combination of both. But they have to get better with drafting offensive linemen, and they have to get better with hiring the right offensive line coach in there. I still am pissed that they just were like, nah, Bill Callahan, yeah, let's just pass on him. That was insane to me. And then seeing what he's been able to do for you guys, because you guys were in a similar situation, like you said, 2020 offensive line wasn't good. He immediately comes in. Next year, you guys have one of the top offensive lines there, and he's able to bring in guys like DeJuan Jones. He's able to bring in the Alex Leatherwoods, and you can trust him with the development because this is a guy that has the resume of developing offensive line talent. The Bengals don't have it, and it's weird. It's kind of a weird space because if you go back, even when the Bengals weren't good, you talk about the early 2000s, you talk about the 90s, they always had good linemen. It's just recently after in the 2010s where they just apparently don't know how to draft linemen or accumulate that talent anymore. So I would say that that's been the biggest issue is they got to draft better, and they have to have a better coaching strategy in place for the offensive line.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll ask you is you look at the landscape of the North, you have not just 4 teams that are over 500 right now. You have 4 organizations. Well, I think the Bengals, are you guys 8-8 or?
Yeah, we're 8-8 right now.
8-8. So you're the only team that has a chance to be below 500 right now. But 8-9, 8-8, it's like kind of the same thing. This one's an 8-win team. But for the future of the AFC North, when I look at this landscape, I go, oh my God, like there are going to be some really good wild card teams for the rest of the decade because you look at it and you see Pittsburgh, they don't go under 500. Like for whatever this season, they did not go under 5. They will not go under 500. Like I'm just never going to bet on it. This is the one year it looked like, hey, they could go over 500, and right when you start believing it, what do they do? Win 2 straight, right? Yeah. Like, nah. Pittsburgh's never going under 500. As long as Mike Tomlin's there, for whatever reason, he got that magic voodoo, whatever he got going on. Then you look at Baltimore, and look, Lamar Jackson, I don't know why so many people choose to doubt him. I've never been on that side of that. Like, I mean, not never. I've been on that side of that. And then I quickly was like, nah, never mind. I was wrong about that. And ever since then, I've been like, I don't know why people refuse to call this man an elite quarterback because he is, right? Top 5 in that conversation, perennial top 5. He is likely to get his 2nd MVP. And when you get 2 MVPs, we talked about this on AFC North Talk, you're a Hall of Famer. Like, you're going to make the Hall of Fame once you get 2. And it might sound crazy because he was drafted in 2018. We had this conversation. We're like, hey, man, there are guys from that 2018, 2017 draft in the AFC North that are already Hall of Famers, right? Miles, TJ, Lamar. They're making the Hall of Fame. and they're going to be first ballot. Like that's how fast things move in the NFL.
Right.
And if Joe gets another like Super Bowl run, he's probably going to get into that category as well, or if he wins an MVP. So I mean, Joe Burrow's not even far off from that. He just signed his second deal, but you look at this and you go, man, the Browns have a stable organization. They seem to have a really good GM, a good head coach, really good staff. You look at Pittsburgh, you know what they have there. You look at Baltimore, you know what they've had for years. You look at Cincinnati, you know that they're going to be stable as well. They have Joe Burrow. They're going to have Jamar Chase. Like they have the bones of what's going to be a really good team. And you just think to yourself, oh my God. When you view the Bengals in the landscape of what the AFC North now looks like, we always known it's been tough football, but now all four teams are truly playing AFC North football.
Right.
Do you look at that and feel like, oh man, did we miss our opportunity to kind of get it on the slide where there were a couple teams down at a time the last few years? Or do you look at this like, okay, well, iron going to sharpen iron, and the next Super Bowl champions are going to come out this division because who's going to be more battle tested than this division, or who might be more scarred from battle than this division? That might also become something that bites us in the butt at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take something that my guy Mon ended up saying on the Bengals Pulse on the Cincinnati Pod, the Cast Network, and I had to agree with him. The Bengals, once they were able to win the AFC North twice, I think they got off focus and tried to focus on how to build a team to beat the Bills in Kansas City. I think they really locked in on how they lost that Kansas City game, and they tried to use this offseason to kind of shore that up. And I think that came back to bite them because the way that they tried to play this season, it just wasn't congruent with the AFC North. Like you can't not run the football in the AFC North, right? It's weird because they did that in 2021. Now, most of that was because of Joe Burrow coming off with a knee injury. And from what I heard, Mike Brown said that if Zach Taylor got Joe hurt that season, he was going to lose his job. So it kind of was forced. But I will say, looking at the rest of the landscape of the North, I think we can kind of expect it to be as competitive as it was. Now, I expected the Browns, especially with you guys adding Deshaun, to be a good team. I expected the Ravens to be a good team. Whenever you have Lamar Jackson, you're going to be a good team. Now, did I expect the Ravens to, hit the ground running in this new offense? No, I did not. I did not expect that. But when you have success and stuff like that, you have to keep continuity going. And I think that these are teams that will have that. I do expect the Steelers to compete. However, I still look at them with what they have at the quarterback position. They can compete in the AFC North. Can they compete for championships in the NFL? Not with the quarterback situation that they have now. Whereas I would say the Bengals, Browns, and Ravens, they all can as long as those guys are healthy. And hell, we might see it this year that the Browns are able to do it without the quarterback, right? I think that they're the one team in the division that can do what the Steelers want to do, right? Like put whoever at quarterback, our defense is going to hold us down. I think the Browns this year with the injuries are what Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin want to be, and that's what they want to do in this current NFL landscape where a lot of people are saying you got to have these high-powered offenses, but hey, we're going to take the defense and we're going to slow things down and we're going to win the old-fashioned way. However, Cleveland is smart enough, and you've said this on the show, to have the guys on offense that are coaching them up to be able to score points. Whereas Pittsburgh, they've done it in the last two games, but they haven't done it this entire season. We've seen that from Cleveland, right? They've been able to score no matter what. So when I look at the landscape of the AFC North, I think the Bengals need to get back focused on, looking at the AFC North and trying to do what you can to win it. Now, I will say this. I think the AFC North division winner, I don't think you'll see a back-to-back division winner like you did before the Bengals did. I think it'll probably go between those three teams. And you're, like you had said earlier, you're going to have hell of a wild card matchups because this division, the way that we play football, it's just always going to be a gauntlet. And I think you'll see three teams regularly from this division make the playoffs in the AFC just because the rest of the AFC just isn't up to par. You look at the AFC West, you look at the AFC East. Like though the AFC South, like none of those teams I feel like would even last in this division. Maybe the Chiefs, maybe the Bills. Everybody else would probably be dog food in this division. So for me, I would say I'm still confident just because I have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and players like that. And I think when you have those players and you see a team, the teams that are in here, you have to have talent to compete in this division. So I don't think that we're going to rule over the division, but I think it could be a hot potato situation where, this year the Ravens win it. Maybe the Browns win it the next season. Maybe the Bengals win it. I think it'll be that kind of situation. Maybe the Steelers win it, right? But I don't think that the Steelers go far in the playoffs and do something. So to me, I kind of saw this coming, especially when you guys went and grabbed Deshaun, right? And when the Ravens finally cemented the Lamar contract, I'm like, all right, here we go. These three teams are going to be duking it out for the foreseeable future. And the one thing that I will say is, to quote Joe Burrow, a lot of people called him cocky. I just thought he was keeping it real. In 2021, he had gotten caught on camera saying, if we can win this division, we can win it all. And I think that rings true because this is the toughest division to play in football, and some of the best teams in the NFL reside in here. And if you can win in this division, then you can do whatever you need to do. And the Bengals are 0-5 in the division, staring down 0-6. So I think they're in a position now where they're like, okay, we thought it was cool to try to look at only the Bills and the Chiefs. These teams in our division are pretty damn good, and they're going to be here to stay. And we have to figure out a way to win against some of these teams, or at least split with some of these teams in order to have success and make the postseason. So I think that I'm just kind of honestly feeling like how I was before. Like as soon as Lamar signed on that dotted line and you guys had Deshaun, my mindset was like, okay, this is a 3-team thing. So that's kind of how I look at it. And that's no disrespect to the Steelers. I think the Steelers will compete. I think they will be over 500 and stuff like that. I just think without them having a quarterback, I don't know how you could run it up against these 3 teams and then take on a team like the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs, because Chiefs are down now, but I can guarantee you next season they are going to reload. They're going to get guys that can actually pass the ball, and we're going to be talking about the Chiefs being back as one of the top teams in the AFC with some of our teams. So for me, it's just kind of, this is the division. We can't run to the AFC South. We can't run to the AFC East. They have an easier path. You just have to take this path, and that's just how it's going to be for probably the foreseeable future.
Yep. And the last thing I want to say before we get out of here, Jonah Williams, what does he do if he sees 95 suit up this week? Like, dog, I thought it was your day off.
If Jonah sees 95 suit up, I think he's going to do what he did against TJ Watt, man. I mean, TJ Watt had this guy false starting, trying to hold him up. I don't think he wants to see Myles Garrett, man. I mean, I think he's gonna
Myles
go
is
out.
only there for like one thing. If Myles ain't playing in that game to make the playoffs, Myles is going in that game to get 3 sacks. Like Myles is in that game, he trying to get that defensive player of the year, dog. Like, like.
I think Jonah will. Now, I'm not going to say, I don't have that much faith in him. Obviously, him as a player, him going into a contract year, the last thing that you want to be seen by these people that are evaluating signing you is you giving up like 3 sacks to Myles Garrett on your last game. So I don't think anybody wants to line up against Myles Garrett because he is an amazing talent. But no, I would never bet on Jonah. I wouldn't bet on Jonah Williams against anybody that's a premier edge rusher. But yeah,
I wonder how much time they spent in this week, like still working these like double teams and everything. Just in case he plays.
That's the weird thing about the Bengals, bro. Like they are like the only team that will not double team Myles Garrett, and I'm like, what the hell are you? Like people triple team this guy, and I've been like vocal about it numerous times, just hoping that somebody just happens to see this. Like, dog, what are you doing? Not double teaming Myles Garrett? Like they didn't do that. They didn't double team Aaron Donald, and I don't know if it's a philosophy thing, but if that's your philosophy, it sucks. I'm gonna be honest.
All right, Ace, man, let them know where they can find you.
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at New Stripe City. You can also find me on the Cincinnati podcast over there as well. And of course, you can find me on AFC North Talk.
All right, man. Thank you for joining us. Everybody have a great day. Have you a better night. Peace.
Peace.